I was the first one to respond to a welfare check because I was already 2 streets over on a noise complaint when dispatch put it out. The call came in just after 9 p.m. A neighbor in a 4-story apartment building said she had been hearing someone crying in the unit next to hers for 3 days. Not arguing, not music, crying. She said it would stop for a little while, then start again. She had knocked more than once, but no one ever answered. The address was an older brick building near the edge of my district, mostly 1-bedroom units with mostly older tenants. When I got there, the woman who had called was already waiting in the hallway in a robe and slippers. She was in her late 60s, and she looked upset, but not in a dramatic way. The kind of person who had probably spent a full day trying to convince herself it was none of her business before calling. She pointed at the apartment across from hers and said, "It started Monday night. I know that because I thought somebody had a baby visiting, but it kept going. I asked if she knew who lived there. She said, no one, not for a while." That changed the feel of it immediately. I checked the door. There was no sound from inside, no movement. The deadbolt wasn't thrown, but the knob was locked. The woman said the building manager had been by that afternoon and told her the unit had been empty for at least 2 months. She said she'd still heard crying after he left. I got the manager on the phone. He lived 10 minutes away and kept apologizing while he drove over. He repeated what the neighbor had said, that the tenant moved out in the spring and that the apartment wasn't re-rented yet, so nobody should have been in there. By the time he arrived, another officer had reached me in the hall. The manager unlocked the door and stepped back. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not decay, not chemicals, just stale, closed-in air and old dust, like a place that had been closed for too long. The second thing I noticed was that it was exactly what he said it was. Empty. No furniture, no boxes, no curtains, just bare rooms and a refrigerator in the kitchen humming to itself. We cleared it anyway. The living room, bedroom, and closet was empty. No one in the bathroom, no one on the fire escape. The place had the look of somewhere nobody had spent time in for weeks. Dust along the baseboards. Scuff marks where furniture used to be. A square of cleaner paint on the wall where something had hung before. The manager kept saying, "See? See?" Then, while standing in the middle of the empty living room, I heard it. A woman crying. Low at first. Not screaming, not words. Just exhausted, crying. Somewhere nearby but hard to place. In the way sounds get hard to place in old buildings. My partner heard it too. We both stopped and looked at each other. The manager went white. It lasted maybe 8 seconds, then cut off. The neighbor across the hall started crying herself when she heard us say we heard it. We checked the hallway and stairwell, but there was nothing. Went downstairs and checked the unit below. There was nobody home, but the tenant answered by phone and said she'd been at her daughter's since that morning. We checked the vacant unit again, from top to bottom. Still nothing. Then the cry started again. This time, I knew it was coming from inside the apartment. Not the rooms, but in the walls. The sound was loudest near the bathroom, which was the smallest room in the unit. It had an old tub, an old sink, chipped tile, and a medicine cabinet hanging slightly crooked. I stood still and listened while it happened. The cry was coming from behind the wall, shared with the plumbing stack. There was a maintenance panel in the hallway outside, painted over so many times it almost disappeared into the drywall. The manager said it only opened to pipes. We got it open. Behind it was a narrow space between the walls, full of pipes, wiring, and old insulation, tight enough that you had to turn sideways to get more than one shoulder in. We shone lights in and saw nothing at first except dust and metal. Then my beam caught something that should not have been there. A blanket. Not old debris, a real blanket, folded and pushed down along the far side behind the plumbing line. We ended up calling the fire department because the space was too tight to enter safely the way it was. While we were waiting, we kept hearing the crying in short bursts. The firefighters pulled part of the bathroom wall and enough tile around the tub to widen the opening. What they found was a crawl space someone had altered. Not built by the landlord, not an original construction. Somebody had cut through the back of a storage recess from the unit next door and made just enough room for a person to be kept in there. There was a plastic jug of water, an overturned bucket, a flashlight, and a stained camping pad on the floor. And there was a woman, alive, barely responsive, and curled on her side with her face against the concrete. She was young, maybe in her early 20s. Her wrists were bruised, her eyes were open but unfocused, and she had been crying so long her voice was almost gone. The unit next door, the one sharing that wall, belonged to a man who had not been home when we canvassed the floor because he worked nights. At least that was what the manager told us. Upon investigation, we found out he didn't work nights. He'd left the building an hour before we arrived with 2 duffel bags and never came back. I won't go into what else came out of that arrest or what they found in his apartment after the warrant. That part belongs in court records, not here. What stayed with me afterward was how close that call came to being dismissed. The apartment looked empty. The manager said it was empty. Even standing inside it, hearing the sound for myself, part of me was still trying to force it into some explanation that made more sense than what was actually there. If the neighbor across the hall had waited one more night, I don't know that we would have found her alive. If you're enjoying these stories, you can subscribe. There are more like this every week. This happened in November 2021. I got dispatched to a call just before 10:30 on a Thursday night. It came in from a delivery driver, which usually means one of 2 things. Either somebody won't come to the door and the driver wants us to stand there while he gets paid, or a customer has gotten aggressive and the driver wants to report the situation. But this one was different from the start. Dispatch said the caller had already completed the delivery and left the address. He was sitting in a gas station parking lot 3 blocks away because he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong at the house he'd just gone to. That was how dispatch put it. There was no threat, no assault, no disturbance. Just a guy saying something felt wrong. My partner and I found him exactly where he said he'd be, still in his car with the insulated delivery bag on the passenger seat. He looked more embarrassed than scared, and kept apologizing before he'd even said what he was calling about. He told us the delivery was to a house in a quiet neighborhood, one of those streets where everything looks tidy and nothing really stands out. The guy who answered seemed normal enough. He looked mid-40s maybe, had plain clothes, paid cash, thanked him, then closed the door. Then he said, "I know that sounds like nothing. I get that." I asked what had actually bothered him. He had to think about it. He said the man had opened the door before he finished knocking, like he had already been standing right there waiting. He said there was a smell coming from inside the house. Not a smell of decay, nothing obvious, just a strong cleaning smell like somebody had used too much detergent or cleaning product. He said while the man was paying him, he heard a dull bump from deeper in the house, upstairs maybe, or at least farther in, and the man didn't react to it at all. Then he said the one detail that convinced him to make the call was that he noticed another delivery bag on the floor just inside the doorway. A different restaurant, but same kind of hot bag he used, still zipped shut. He said it looked like it had been there a while. That still wasn't enough on paper, but it was enough for us to go knock on the door. The house was exactly like he described it. Quiet block, porch light on, no noise from inside, no obvious damage, no vehicles parked wrong, no lights on upstairs. If the driver hadn't been sitting in that parking lot waiting for us to tell him he was being paranoid, I probably would have expected the whole thing to end at the doorstep. I knocked. A man answered within a second or 2. Again, that in itself meant nothing. People stand near their doors all the time, but the driver had been right about the smell. The second the door opened, there was an overpowering cleaning smell. Laundry detergent, or bleach, or some combination of both. The man was calm, had a clean t-shirt with sweatpants on, no obvious sign he'd been asleep or interrupted. I told him we'd gotten a call from someone who was concerned after a delivery and asked if everyone in the house was okay. He smiled a little when I said that, like it was mildly ridiculous. He said he lived alone, that the delivery man probably heard noise from his television, said he'd ordered dinner earlier and the first order got messed up, so he had another one dropped off later. All reasonable, all delivered in exactly the tone you'd use if you wanted to sound reasonable. Then, while he was talking, we heard it. A single sharp knock from upstairs. Not from the door, not from plumbing, from inside the house. Just one. The man looked at us and said, "Old pipes." I asked him again if anyone else was in the house. He said no. Then I asked if he'd step outside for a second while we made sure of that. That was the first time his expression changed. Not much, just enough to show that he had stopped playing along with the idea that this was routine. He tried to shut the door really fast, but my partner was quick to act and he caught it with his foot. We pushed back, got in, and restrained him. Once we were inside, the delivery driver's feeling stopped being hard to explain. The first floor hallway had 3 interior doors, all with deadbolts installed on the outside. Not childproof covers, not privacy locks, actual keyed deadbolts facing the hall. There was a white noise machine on a side table near the stairs turned up almost all the way. I turned it off, and we could hear movement in the rooms upstairs. We went upstairs, forced a door open, and inside were a woman and a teenage girl. Neither of them could tell us much right away, beyond their names, and that they were not supposed to be there. The room had blankets, bottled water, a bucket in the corner, and takeout containers stacked near the wall. The second delivery bag the driver had seen was for them. So was the first one. The man had not been ordering dinner for himself. He had been feeding people he was keeping in the house. We found another locked room downstairs with another woman in it. There were phones, IDs, and pieces of luggage in a hall closet, zip ties in the kitchen junk drawer, and 3 different notebooks with first names, pickup locations, and times written down. Turns out he had been finding women online, using fake names, luring them there one at a time, and keeping them locked in those rooms until he decided what to do next. The man never said much after he was in cuffs, just kept asking for a lawyer and insisting everything in the house was consensual. We called in for backup and medics, and by the time detectives got there, the house had stopped feeling like a house. It felt like something arranged to look normal from the street, and not much else. I spoke to the delivery driver before he left. He kept saying he almost didn't call because he knew how it sounded. Said he thought we were going to tell him he'd overreacted and send him on his way. The truth is, if he had convinced himself he was overreacting, we probably wouldn't have been at that door that night. What I can't stop thinking about is how ordinary the whole thing looked at first. Quiet street, porch light on, a man answering the door in sweatpants and acting inconvenienced. Food being delivered to the house like any other night. If the driver hadn't trusted that feeling enough to make the call, those women would have still been in there when the street went quiet again. And from the outside, nothing about that house would have looked wrong. I've worked K9 for 9 years. My dog Rex is a Belgian Malinois, 7 years old, trained in narcotics, tracking, and building searches. He's been with me since he was 18 months old. I know his behavior the way you know a partner. Every signal, every posture, every way he communicates what he's found or what he's feeling. In 9 years, he has never once refused a command. Until that house on Meridian Street. The call came in on a Saturday night. A woman had been reported missing by her sister. She hadn't shown up to work in 3 days, wasn't answering her phone, and her last known location was her apartment on the east side. Detectives had a person of interest, a man she'd been seeing briefly, who lived in a house about 2 miles from her apartment. They had enough for a welfare check and a search if he consented. He didn't consent, so they got a warrant. Our unit was called in to assist with the building search before detectives went through for evidence. Standard procedure. Rex and I go in first, clear the space, make sure it's safe. The man was already in custody when we arrived, so the house was ours to search. Rex was fine through the ground floor. Kitchen, living room, and bathroom, he moved through all of it normally. Focused, professional. We went up the stairs, and he cleared the first 2 rooms on the upper floor without hesitation. Then we reached the 3rd door at the end of the hall. Rex stopped at the door. Not slowed down, he stopped completely with his 4 feet planted and body low. He wouldn't go near it. I've seen Rex hesitate before. A dark stairwell, a tight crawl space, somewhere the footing was uncertain. He'd pause, reassess, then go. But this was different. This was a flat refusal from an animal that doesn't refuse. He stood there with his eyes fixed on the bottom of the door and wouldn't move forward, no matter what I asked of him. I tried the command 3 times. Each time he stayed exactly where he was. I radioed down that Rex was alerting on the 3rd room and that I was going to make entry. I told him to stand by. Rex wouldn't follow me to the door. He stayed at the point where he'd stopped and watched me go without him. In 9 years, he has never watched me go somewhere without following. I felt that more than I wanted to. I opened the door. The room was small and empty. A single window covered with blackout material taped at the edges. A mattress on the floor. Nothing else visible. Then I looked at the floor more carefully. In the far corner, partially hidden under the edge of the mattress, was a trapdoor. Flush with the floor, a recessed handle, the kind that required installation. This wasn't original to the house. Someone had put it there deliberately. I moved the mattress aside and stood over it for a moment. Then I radioed down and told them to send detectives up immediately and to call the coroner. I already knew what was down there before I opened it. Rex had known from the hallway. That's what the refusal was. Not fear, not confusion. Rex had done his job perfectly. He'd found what we came looking for. He just understood, the way trained dogs understand, that what was below that floor wasn't something either of us could help anymore. I won't describe what was found below the trapdoor. I'll say that the investigation that followed determined it wasn't the first time that room had been used that way. The man in custody had been in that house for 4 years. 4 years. I've thought about that number a lot since then. 4 years of neighbors, of mail being delivered, of a man living what looked from the outside like an ordinary life. 4 years of that room existing behind a closed door at the end of a hallway. What I think about most is Rex in that hallway, planted at that spot, trembling under his coat, with his eyes fixed on the door. He knew the second we hit that hallway. He knew, and he was telling me the only way he knew how. I've never pushed him past a refusal since that day, not once. If Rex won't go somewhere, I've decided I probably shouldn't either.